When Igor Sikorsky was interviewed in his office at Stratford, Connecticut, he spent 2 hours answering questions put to him by Alvin Sizer, news editor of the New Haven Register. This film, consisting of a few excerpts from the interview, provides an insight into the keen mind and warm personality of the aviation pioneer who has contributed so much to the scientific and cultural life of his adopted country. Come along with us now for a chat with Igor Sikorsky.
Mr. Sikorsky, could you tell us something about the first experiences with standard wing aircraft, from the small aircraft to the multi-engine aircraft that you started to build in Russia?
Yes, indeed. I was dreaming more and more about the fact that everywhere, but particularly in Russia, the future would belong to large, multiple-engined airplanes, a craft that could stay in the air in case of one engine out of commission, a craft which would have not a single pilot but a crew, with some of the men doing the job of a mechanic and other doing the job of a navigator, and finally one or even two pilots, minimum 4. Now, I succeeded to persuade the head of the great organization, the Russian Baltic Car Factory, of which our division, the Sikorsky Aircraft Division, was a subsidiary, was a part at that time. So I succeeded to persuade him that we must build a big aeroplane. It was a dramatic evening on the September 17, 1912, when after making a long flight and participating at each time in the military competition in St. Petersburg, I addressed this man and tried to persuade him that if we win the competition, we should take the prize and build the first big multiple-engine aeroplane. Now, I stopped several times, trying not to fatigue my host, but anyway, he encouraged me, go on, go on. So I went on, told more about the possible characteristic of this aeroplane, and finished my talk at midnight, saying that if we win the competition, let's spend the money on the construction of a big airplane. My host stood out and firmly stated no. Begin the construction of a big airplane immediately. I went home. It was around 2 o'clock in the morning. I ordered to get to me the chief engineer, the head of the engineering bureau, a couple of my loyal foremen, and I served them a drink of wine, told them a great news, which was accepted enthusiastically, of course, and from then on, from 2 to 4 to 6, we had one of the most effective business engineering conferences I had in my life. The job ahead of us was a difficult job. There were no material at that time. There were no wheels available for an airplane of this size. There were no such thing as the high steel wires. So we had to improvise. High steel wires could be received from a piano factory as actual piano chords, and so forth and so forth. Well, briefly, the big airplane was built in spite of the doubts expressed by great many observers. Most predicted failure. The ship was built, the ship made the first successful flight on May 13, 1913, and it was the first successful 4-engine airplane in the world. And for the next year and a half, I happened to be the only pilot to fly a 4-engine airplane until I checked out. A few officers, late 1914, when the war started, and the Imperial Russian government started to order these ships, which later were ordered in substantially large quantities and were the first heavy bombing airplanes used by any country in this great conflict. Now, that was briefly the history as it went on with the development of my aircraft in Russia.
Mr. Sikorsky, will you tell us how you happened to get into the transoceanic flying field?
As I mentioned earlier, we went into the amphibian field, and this consequently placed us in the flying boat field, and in turn resulted in our getting the first contract for a large, even though short-range flying boat to carry 40 passengers, which was about twice as many as the largest transport of that time carried, for Pan American Airways. We built the flying boat. It was a good one, called S-40 flying boat, and by the way, this is this model here which hangs over my head nearly. I was among the passengers during the first flight of this boat from Miami to Kingston, Jamaica, Barranquilla, Colombia, and Panama Canal. The head of the expedition and chief pilot was Charles Lindbergh, and I had a great chance, and I would say privilege, to spend a great deal of time with him, to learn, to respect, and admire this man in every respect, in every connection, tremendously. Every evening, we were going with the crew for dinner. We were flying only during the daytime and staying in the hotels overnight in Puerto Rico, in Jamaica, Barranquilla, and finally Panama Canal. So every evening, we were sitting together with Lindbergh on a table with the rest of the crew, in which he and I were usually taking the menu, turning it upside down, and starting to make sketches or plans or specification for a transoceanic flying boat. We both believed that transatlantic flying is possible. At that time, a flying boat seemed to be the right solution, and we hoped and believed that it can be done. Consequently, when we came back from this trip, Lindbergh and I decided that he will sell the idea to Pan American Airways, which may have had it anyway, but Lindbergh was the advisor of them, and I would do similarly to United Aircraft, insisting that we take a job like that because I believe that we can fulfill the contract. Now, all this did materialize. Contract was placed in 1934, the first big flying boat, called S-42, with an unusual for that time combination of a very long range with a fairly high speed. Was put for the first time into the water and then into the air. The ship fully confirmed the hopes which we have given it. It was capable to fly across the Atlantic Ocean or any other ocean. It had the lifting capacity, had the range, and had the cruising speed of the order of 160 miles per hour, which again at that time was a high speed, good enough to begin the flight, to begin such service. In connection with this airplane, I would like to mention the following interesting fact. 1934 was still a pretty hard time for American aviation. There has been a considerable amount of criticism, some of it undoubtedly unfriendly. And I remember that in July, we received a letter from the president of the National Aeronautical Association asking to make efforts to establish world records, because this was the recognized yardstick of the quality of the ships. Now it so happened that on the evening of the same day, in the morning of which we received this letter, we were able to reply that in line with your letter, the company tried to establish world records, and as of this evening, we added 8 world records to the existing world records of the United States. I think they were 9 total at that time or so. We added 8, thereby bringing the United States to the first place as to the tenure of the world record, with France being first. It was a pretty brilliant flight because it was one of these combined speed, distance, and load flights which are perhaps the most indicative to the practical value of the aircraft. The big ship has been piloted by a crew of three famous men: Lindbergh, Music, who was the chief pilot of Pan American Airways, and our Captain Boris Sergeyevsky, who was the holder of a number of world records.
Well, Mr. Sikorsky, how did you get back into the helicopter game?
I was certainly thinking about the first love virtually all the time. It was back in 1926 and later in 1930, for instance, when I made the sketches of an aircraft which is very, very similar to the VS-300, which eventually has been constructed. This is my 1930 sketch. However, the whole story is perhaps somewhat complex, but can be done quickly. Now, I realized that while we were busy and working with the extremely difficult pioneering problem of making a good airplane capable to inaugurate the transoceanic flying, that was something new, not just another airplane. It was an airplane with different and somewhat novel characteristics, impossible characteristics. So while this is underway, it would not be wise to start something new, because it is not. Helicopter was not a project which I could just to charge to the engineers to do something about, and to test pilot to test and to do something about it also. It was a thing which called for attention, I would say love, I would say all energy, knowledge and support which a man can put in. And of course it was my ambition, my plans, my desire to live my life again, to design an aircraft without knowing how it should be done, because no one really knew properly how it could be done. Helicopter was at that time one of the impossibles. Still, many people considered that no helicopter with good, real control characteristics could and would ever be constructed. Other pessimists said that even if you will construct a helicopter, no one would need this helicopter. I remember a good friend of mine and a very prominent designer, scientist in aviation, asked, when would the helicopter go faster than the airplane? Do you know that? I said, yes, I know. The answer is never. When would the helicopter be more efficient than the airplane? Do you know that? I also said, yes, I know that. Never. But I said that helicopter will do a number of jobs which no airplane will do, and which in fact nothing else will do except a helicopter. Consequently, that was the idea. While I resumed thinking actively about the helicopter around the year 19, I would say, well, I thought about it all the time, but more energetically. It was beginning 1929. However, at that time we were, and a little later, busy with the transoceanic flying. We wanted to do the pioneering, and I would pretend to say that certainly we did the pioneering. We contributed to the pioneering of transoceanic flying, but by the year 1938 or so, the pioneering period for flying was over. The thing was an established fact. From then, no, it were, of course, bigger, better, more comfortable, more efficient airplanes, just like it is with the steamships, but the fact was done. Helicopter remained to be solved. And so from 1938, I decided to make every effort to return, and this time to build a successful helicopter. And with respect to the objective of the helicopter, one of the major things which I was aiming at was that I had every conviction the helicopter will prove a unique and extremely effective method or instrumentality for saving lives. In this connection, I would like to mention the following. A friend of mine, Colonel Dollfuss, director of the National Museum of France, sent me a brochure dated 1860 something. In other words, just about 100 years old, entitled Aeronef, appareil de sauvetage. Aeronef was for a flying machine. At that time, any kind of names were used. Aeronef was one. But the description gave a fairly satisfactory description of the helicopter. So that the idea that a vertical lift aircraft could be outstandingly valuable and successful for saving life, that was one of my dreams. I wanted to do that as long as I'm alive, even if it's the last big job which I did in my life, which perhaps it will be. I think it was, besides other things, it had to me a sort of a romantic or philosophical appeal. The appeal is this: what kind of a gadget or machine or vehicle or so forth can give you unlimited freedom of transportation? Well, when you walk, you need a trail or something. A pack animal needs even a better trail. A wagon, horse wagon, needs a still better, no longer trail, it must be road. Automobile needs still better road. Railroad needs a very good track. Steamship needs a long, sufficiently deep waterway from beginning to the point of arrival. Point, that's all. Airplane can fly anywhere, but airplane needed big airport. If there is no airport, no flying field, the airplane is obviously helpless and powerless completely. If a man is in need, sinking, something like that, well, the airplane can come in and throw some flowers on him, and that's just about all. A direct lift aircraft could come in and save his life. Direct lift aircraft can go anywhere, anytime where there is air, and this commodity is fairly widespread over our wonderful globe. Even if the helicopter cannot land, and these were the ideas which I had fully before I started it, helicopter can use the hoist, in other words, or a cable, and can contact any place, on the ground, on a roof, on water, on a treetop, absolutely any place. Helicopter is the only thing which can do that. Now that were the ideas and dreams why I wanted to start a helicopter, and why I succeeded finally to sell the management of United Aircraft the idea to authorize its construction. Now once I received the okay, I promptly started to work without asking any further instruction. It was a small work, most interesting chance to live one's life again. To build something without knowing how to build it, then to climb in the cockpit, because according to my plans, which of course were materialized, I was not only the designer but the test pilot of this aircraft during the first flight when it flew to the altitude of this table and then a little bit longer, which happened in September of 1939.
Do you think the same opportunities are present today for the young scientists to get ahead, to achieve something that you had, or is science and research largely a matter of a team getting together today?
Well, certainly the question of a teamwork entered now to a greater extent than it entered before. And this is both in science and perhaps in every other branch of technique. Nevertheless, I am convinced that the work of the individual still remains a very important factor, still remains a spark which moves mankind ahead, even more than teamwork. Teamwork comes into existence after the spark, the intuitive spark of a living man started something. Then later comes the teamwork to give a bigger body to the little soul which he created. So briefly, to my mind, creative work is still there with us, still there to stay, and still remain a tremendously important factor in the progress of mankind, and also an intensely interesting thing. Now, in this respect, you asked me formerly why I came to America. Well, I came because I hoped that this is where it still is, and I believe that it really is. I remember a Nazi made a statement which would hold for the communists as well, which is this. He will say that they are thankful to Hitler for having liberated them from liberty. Now, same thing is true for communism, and unfortunately, same thing is true for quite a big bunch of people right here in our United States who want and hope that someone will liberate them from liberty. Because liberty is a terrible thing to some extent. It shows you if there is another fellow more intelligent or more harder working than you are, and then it gets you into troubles. Nevertheless, all told, everyone, the intelligent and the less intelligent, the successful and the less successful, win from the fact that the more intelligent has chance to act freely. That's where it comes in. And this, to my mind, exists now. The freedom of initiative now shifted from going west and starting a farm or ranch to other branches of human activities. Instead of starting a branch, you may start a new industry sometime. But it's still there.
Thank you very much.